When governments around the world and entities around the world who hold our debt sell it, and the only entity left to buy it would be the Federal Reserve, who in essence creates money out of thin air to do so. Well, this creates currency devaluation, of course, but it is also the beginning of the end. This is the signal of a currency in terminal decline. And I think that's basically where we are at right now. And I think it's a phenomena that will only accelerate.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for May 6th through May 13th, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature 2023 1-ounce Silver Krugerrand at $3.10 over spot. We also have 1 10th-ounce gold Canadian maples at $29 over melt. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're always delighted to have this widely followed returning guest. Andy Schectman is the CEO of Miles Franklin Precious Metals. He joins us this Tuesday, May 7th, 2024. Andy, thanks for coming back on for this weekly market wrap-up.
Good to be back, Don, again, and hopefully I'm coherent after 4 days in Las Vegas at the XRP convention, which was very cool. You know, I guess I would just like to say that it's been my feeling for a very long time that the people in either industry should be complementary of one another, that there doesn't have to be a mutually exclusive viewpoint in one or the other. In fact, I think if you own metals, you could argue a allocation, dipping your toe into cryptocurrencies is not a bad thing, and vice versa. And I went there with that approach in mind and was very pleasantly surprised. Not surprised isn't the right word. Confirmed that, you know, there are a lot of people out there with very open minds and realize that in essence, there's a lot of similarity between the way people look at the world who are using cryptocurrencies as their vehicle to break free from the fiat experiment, and just like there is in precious metals. Now, I would argue most of the people in precious metals are more concerned with preservation than they are with profit, but yet I think there's a lot of people who are beginning to understand, those in the crypto space, that adding a little bit of gold to their portfolio only makes it stronger. And this infighting and this pitting against one another is counterproductive. And I just thought it was great. And I wanted to give a shout out to the folks who put on the XRP Las Vegas. And I thought it was very well done. And I thought the people there were fantastic.
One thing I would add to that discussion is when we talked with Patrick Holland, the founder of the Missouri Freedom Initiative, where they've got a bill for the second year in a row now to make sure that gold and silver are not only legal tender in the state of Missouri, but also able to be used for payment of taxes, able to be used in private contracts between individuals, buyers and sellers, etc. They also make it worded in such a way that competing currencies can be used in addition. They're trying to break the stranglehold, the monopoly of the U.S. dollar, and on people, so that we aren't subject to the programmatic debasement of it and theft, therefore, of our savings and earnings and retirement and so on. So it's interesting.
It's happening in real time too. You're right, and good for them, and good for the state of Missouri. Let's hope it follows suit elsewhere throughout the country, like Nebraska, who you and I were talking offline, just became the 12th state to end state capital gains taxes on the sale of gold and silver. And the way that they describe it is that on your 1040, they back out the state tax implication. And, there are states out there who understand what is happening and doing the best they can to provide their constituents an option. And thank God that's somewhat, to me, the American spirit rearing its head in many states. It's a growing trend as well.
I'll give you one more example, and that is the survival and preparedness expert James Rawls from survivalblog.com that we interview periodically on our channel has a sister website where they sell antique firearms, because those aren't subject to some of the regulations on modern firearms. And he says on that website, they have all the pricing, both in Federal Reserve notes. He won't say dollars. He says Federal Reserve notes, and in grams or ounces of silver. He says it's remarkable over time to watch how the price for those weapons in terms of grams or ounces of silver is remarkably constant. And yet the price has to keep going up and up and up and up and up in Federal Reserve notes because of the debasement of the currency. So competing currencies.
Well, and if you look at it in gold, which has performed a little bit better than silver, at least for now, you would see that over time, you would use less and less and less ounces of gold to buy the same thing. And I would expect silver to show that in the end. But what we've seen with gold for 25 years is about a 9% compounding annual return. And so, if someone decided 20 years ago to use gold to buy a home or waited and took out a 4% or a 5% mortgage, they would have come out way ahead just by holding gold, which pays no interest and earns nothing but dust sitting in a safe. So the point of it is that the exercise in precious metals is one of preservation. And it's not about getting wealthy. It is wealth, but it is wealth that has a way of keeping up with the debasement of the currencies around us. And, there was the incrementum, I think it's called. They do that huge gold report every year. And they had a chart going back in just about every single major currency. For the past 25 years, the average annual return is between 8 and 11% across the board in all the major currencies. So, it's sometimes return on your money is not really as great as return of your money. And I think that's what we're trying to talk about with gold and silver. It's not about getting wealthy. It's that it's a return of purchasing power, let's call it. And it doesn't continue to slide away from us the way that this dollar does. And the illusion that we're only at 3 or 4% inflation is nonsense. It's more like 9, 10, 11% inflation, but I digress. Anyways, it's important to understand that. And that's, I think, really the whole idea of owning gold and silver is that, if nothing else, throughout all of time, it has proven to retain its purchasing power and in some cases even increase it.
So as you're talking about this, you're describing the process by which our currency has been debased by the government and by the banking institution that's in collusion with the government since 1913 in the U.S. Now, actually, in all countries around the world have gone on this fiat experiment. The next chapter of that grand experiment, which is always seemed to have been working against earners, savers, and retirees, is called modern monetary theory, MMT. And you've pointed out to us several times in the past that some of the lead economic advisors to the current presidential administration are advocates of modern monetary theory, which goes from cheating and stealing into ridiculous insanity. There's been a widely popular, a viral video that's come out across the internet. We'll put a link in the description of this video to Fox Business story about it that says White House economic advisor struggles with questions on monetary policy when asked some very point blank and concise questions about how the dollars are created in the U.S., what the debt is, and who's buying the bonds. Jared Bernstein, one of the lead economic advisors who chairs the White House Council of Economic Advisors, was being interviewed for a new film called Finding the Money, which is ironically a documentary made by advocates of modern monetary theory. However, in that interview, he just stumbles all over, just babbling, kind of like someone in a job interview who has no qualifications for the job they're applying for and just tries to just talk his way in circles. But maybe it's not because he doesn't understand it. Maybe it's because it doesn't make any sense, even if you do understand it. We'll include a clip here if we can, but at least we'll put a link to the Fox Business News story in here about that. But what you've been telling us all along is that the advisors to our administration are advocates of something that makes no sense in the first place, whether or not they can explain it or not. Your comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, he's the lead economic advisor. Maybe I've been giving the guy too much credit. This is the guy who advocates for losing the reserve status. And I would make the connection of weaponizing the dollar and telling Saudi Arabia we're going green and giving him the credit for being the author of this theory. But I wonder if it's more along the lines of the people that put him into power just understand the guy is inept. He has a degree in music, I think, from Columbia University, where he studied the Cloward-Piven theory, And at the same time, he has a master's degree in social work. This is the lead economic advisor to the U.S. government, who could not explain the simple question of how bonds, selling of bonds, provide the Treasury with money to finance their spending habits. And it was thoroughly embarrassing. And when I sent it to you a few days ago, I was out of town and I didn't get your reaction. But when I watched it, it was of embarrassment and shock that this is a guy that leads the Economic Advisory Committee in the United States White House. And I don't know if it's ineptitude or what, but it's something people should check out. It's truly shocking. And when you realize these are the people that are, and he is a modern monetary theorist, by the way, these are the people that are directing policy course, it's absolutely frightening. I think people need to take a look at it and wonder, is it ineptitude? Are our politicians that stupid? And as I've said, is it too stupid to be stupid? Or maybe they're just stupid. But it is one of the most shocking things I've ever seen for a lead economic advisor. And it explains a little bit as far as I'm concerned. But look, I think what the whole encapsulation of it is that when a currency is in terminal decline the way that ours is, I think it's easy to see it when you look at the issue of bond sales. And when governments around the world and entities around the world who hold our debt sell it, and the only entity left to buy it would be the Federal Reserve, who in essence creates money out of thin air to do so. Well, this creates currency devaluation, of course, but it is also the beginning of the end. This is the signal of a currency in terminal decline. And I think that's basically where we are at right now. And I think it's a phenomena that will only accelerate. Because if they raise rates, they bring down the whole house of cards, right? And if they choose inflation, which ultimately I'm sure that's what they will do, it ends up in higher interest rates, especially if it's the Fed who has to create money out of thin air to buy the bonds. And it's just like this new program that the Treasury is rolling out. The government is rolling out a new Treasury buyback program to support the largest Treasury market in the world, this engine of liquidity. The problem is that the Treasury is broke. And who's going to pay for the bonds? Who's going to buy back these bonds if the Treasury is broke, which we are? And the question is really an easy answer, has an easy answer. It's the Fed. The New York Fed will have to create money to buy the bonds, which again is monetization of assets. And so this whole charade is beginning to accelerate. So it's not higher for longer, it's higher forever. Inflation is not going away. They will not lower rates, no matter what the market is trying to say that they're going to lower rates here at the end of the year. They won't. They can't. And I think this is a new reality that people will soon begin to realize, that this pipe dream of a soft landing and lowering rates is, I think, off the table and out of the question. So I guess we'll have to see. But to me, rates are only going to go higher, and they will choose inflation over austerity the way that all politicians have since the beginning of time.
Yeah, so we've only been on here a couple minutes. We already highlighted three major concerns that our viewers have had over a period of time, and we've discussed them frequently. One is the fundamental corruptness of the Ponzi scheme and the lack of underlying asset value of our entire monetary system. So that's one. The second is the ineptitude of our administration, whether it's ineptitude or whether it's intentional selection of individuals who will be basically sock puppet placeholders and not stand in the way of the revolution, which is driving us towards socialism, communism, globalism, however you want to frame that, and inexorably taking away from freedom, privacy, property rights, etc. of our citizens. And I guess related to that is, who are the adults in the room? If our so-called elected officials and their appointees are inept, then are the elections even valid? I mean, who actually wants to have these positions of authority where we delegate such tremendous authority over our lives to people who evidently do not have the best interests of our people at heart, or if they do, are incapable of standing up for that. Now, in contrast to that, we've seen a number of governors who have stood up in the past few months. You mentioned Nebraska passing that the sale of gold and silver will not be taxable in the state of Nebraska for capital gains. We also have had in the state of Florida, where you and I both live, our governor DeSantis standing up in several arenas to overreach from either the federal or globalist organization, saying not here, not against our people. It will not happen in Florida. Do you have any comments on that sort of counter movement of local and state officials who are standing up for the people in the face of this apparent ineptitude, or perhaps worse, at the national and global levels?
Yeah, I mean, there is certainly a grassroots effort by certain states, obviously most of the red states, that are pushing back. And it's not just the state and local. You have, people in Congress too, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who gets a lot of crap for putting America first. Let me give you an example, right? And to me, Dunnigan, this is everything that is wrong with this country. And this moron, the House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, okay? This guy says the U.S. may have to deploy troops to the Ukraine if Kiev suffers a complete collapse against Russia. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries has warned in an interview with CBS released on Sunday. The senior Democratic lawmaker suggested that if Kiev cannot win the war with Russia using billions of dollars worth of U.S. military aid, which is stupid as hell to begin with, Washington could potentially have to intervene directly in the conflict. Now, you can't make this up, what I'm about to say here. And he says, this is exactly how he said it, right? This wokeness, this stupid wokeness is enough to make me vomit. We can't let Ukraine fail, because if it does, there's a significant likelihood that America will have to get into the conflict, not simply with our money, but with our service women and our servicemen. I mean, you can't make this crap up. Jeffrey said, meanwhile, claimed that, and here's Marjorie Taylor Greene, that U.S. efforts to support Ukraine, including pushing a new $61 billion assistance package through Congress, has been stymied by what he called a pro-Putin faction within the Republican Party. And he singled out Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has called for the funds to be used for domestic needs rather than sent to the Ukraine. God forbid we take $61 billion to help our country, our borders, our lawlessness in the cities, our crumbling infrastructure. And now you're a bad person, and you're xenophobic, and you're just a bad person if you want to put America first before giving another $61 billion. And then if that doesn't work, we have to let our service women and our servicemen go in to fight this war. This is exactly what is wrong with this country, period. And God bless people like Marjorie Taylor Greene who have the cojones to stand up to this crap, and all of the local governors and state leaders in states like Florida and Texas and Missouri and Wyoming and Idaho and Alaska and Utah and on and on and on, because insanity is prevailing throughout this country at a level that I don't think most people can really deal with, to the point where 41% of America, according to a poll by Rasmussen, believes that within 5 years there will be some form of a civil war. Now ask yourself, if we do have the elections by November, you got half the country furious. And I don't care what people say. It's always been the right is so radical. To me, the right is not radical. The left is frighteningly radical, ridiculously frighteningly radical. I find it to be something that is shockingly underreported on the majority of the left-leaning media. And they don't see the things that the rest of us are talking about, and they pigeonhole us into being radical, crazy, beliefs, and they paint the people who want to put America first in a very, very poor light. And where I come from, that's called patriotism, and that's called doing the right thing. As it is, we give more and support more around the world than any country on the planet. And to want to put ourselves first at a period of time when this country is running amok is vilified by the House Minority Leader. I find it to be absolutely disgusting. I don't know your feelings, but.
Well, I know we homeschooled our 5 children, and in the topic of debate, one of the things that they came back and told us right away is that to use ad hominem attacks against the opponent when you don't have any is a desperation tactic when you have nothing that you can actually come with a cogent argument against their position. And so, for example, Rand Paul, when the first huge Ukraine assistance bill was being voted in Congress, said, before we send all this money overseas, we should at least have an accountability plan for what are the specific objectives and how are we going to track and know how it was actually spent. And he was immediately pilloried as a Putin tool and a tool of Russia and all that, because who would ever ask for any kind of accountability on enormous sums of money being sent unless you were working for the enemy? So immediately it was a personal smear against him and his integrity, rather than, oh, yeah, that's what adults would do, is they'd have an accountability plan if we're going to send our hard-earned taxpayer dollars overseas for some ostensible purpose.
To my understanding, there's been no congressional oversight in any of the money sent there. I mean, at least there wasn't a few weeks ago when I last read that, but this is the point, is that you're going to have some form of, I don't want to call it a civil war, but unrest, no matter what happens, no matter what the outcome is. And, I think it's interesting. I spent a couple of weeks in Europe and could sense things happening. And I came home and read an article by Doug Casey. And I just want to highlight a couple of points, because Doug is a very interesting man. And when it comes to big picture, geopolitical, political, historical precedent or environment or viewpoints, he's amongst the best. And I just want to highlight one of the things he talks about, this mass immigration of people, and that most people over time came to this country wanting to work hard and assimilate. And so to make comparisons that this is a country that has always allowed immigration is wrong. They would come here under the right rules, under the right ideological viewpoint of coming to a country and being proud to be here and working hard to understand the culture and working hard to build a life for their family. And that starts by learning the language and the culture and assimilating. And he's talking about, in Europe, this question is more easily answered. He says the same trend is taking place there. And the people of literally every country in the EU are calling loudly to stop the mass wave of, he calls it, parasite immigration. And I saw a lot of this and read some newspapers in Europe that were talking about this. And he says what's happening is that these people eventually have receive the right to vote. They will always vote in favor of a central government that provides them with entitlements. Once their numbers substantially exceed 50% of all voters, the collectivist oligarchy in Brussels he's talking about will become autonomous. And the same things he says, elections will become meaningless and power will remain with the Brussels elite permanently. Well, doesn't that sound like the Cloward-Piven theory here, what they're doing, that they are letting these people in illegally? These people have no intention of assimilating and working hard. He calls them parasites. They are sucking off the system, where 65% of people who are receiving some form of taxpayer subsidy are people in this country illegally, compared to just over 30% of U.S. households receiving some form of taxpayer subsidy. And, he goes on to say, and of course, both the government and the media are doing all they can to enforce this propaganda. Well, that is the Cloward-Piven theory. The parasite immigration supporters are good people and objectors are bad people. Look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, just saying, look, we've given all this money to the Ukraine without oversight. This $60 billion could go a long way in fixing our border problems and the infrastructure of this country and everything that, I'm sure 60 billion could go a long way in the United States, yet we continue to borrow money that we don't have, print money that we don't have, in order to borrow it or send it out around the world in a way that is very divisive and is creating this whole narrative of de-dollarization and de-treasurization around the globe. It just is crazy that a member of Congress would be painted in this light for advocating for this country first. And I think it's just absolutely insanity. To me, this is, again, I keep saying, it's been more disappointing and disheartening to me to see what's happening around the country than outside the country with the mismanagement of the dollar. And this is just another very, very good example.
If we could turn our attention to the precious metals arena, because a lot of our viewers are keenly interested in knowing what they can do to restore sanity to their domestic world, in their household and in their family, and do the right thing when it seems that the authorities that are at the helm of our financial and geopolitical world are doing just about everything that can be done to bring our constitutional republic to a close, or our financial lives to a place of great pain. You mentioned that in the UK, there are buybacks being offered by the UK Mint. Can you explain more about that?
Yeah, you can't make it up. I remember, I've been doing this for a long time, done again for over 3 decades. And I remember Gordon Brown selling almost all of the UK's gold in 2001, 02, somewhere in that neighborhood, for about $252 an ounce. He bottom ticked it perfectly. And so the United Kingdom, in terms of gold that they possess, their coffers are low, shall we say. So I find it interesting. This was an article that came out. I'll read it real quick. Selling back your physical bullion coins and bars. And this is from the Royal Mint in the United Kingdom. If you have gold, silver, or platinum bullion coins and bars to sell, the Royal Mint will offer you a competitive buyback rate based on live gold, silver, or platinum prices. We will quote to buy back your coins and bars at 98% of current gold bid price if stored within the vault. Whilst, I like that English, whilst previously we only offered the option to sell bullion, which was stored in our on-site vault, we now offer investors the chance to sell bullion, which was stored or purchased elsewhere. In addition, the bullion which you sell to us does not have to be produced by the Royal Mint, as we will gladly accept inquiries regarding coins and bars from other mints and refineries around the world, offering you both convenience and flexibility. I find it interesting that the Royal Mint wants to buy people's gold and silver and platinum back. Does that signal a eminent move in the price that they know of? Are they trying to tell people, well, you've had a nice run, maybe you should sell before it really takes off, and trapping them in what is the system? And again, maybe I've just become cynical, or maybe there is a fine line between, pessimism and realism. But to me, this is just kind of a psyop, if you will, trying to squeeze as much as they can out of the system, and even from their own populace, saying, we'll buy it from you. They wouldn't do so if they felt it was a loser. And I don't know, I found it interesting just to mention that.
Well, another aspect of this that you've been describing to us in some detail over the past several months is the physical metals drain down of the major exchanges, both the COMEX, the LBMA, and so on. And you've been talking about this, basically a generational shift, tidal shift of metals from the west to the east. Looking forward, as most adults do, you'd think that the people would look and say, gee, what's going to happen when the supply runs out, when the exchanges simply don't have it? And you've also described in particular how, for example, Chinese interest took over the LBMA already, and China is backdooring metals out of exchange for physical methods, etc. So it may be quite possible that this is also a move to make sure that another potential source of physical supply is tapped while it still can be had at, as you say, I guess current prices being lower than they have a right to be fundamentally. So can you maybe address that in the light of the other stuff you've talked about?
Yeah, and a point of clarification that the Chinese own the LME, which is the London Metals Exchange, different from the LBMA, and that's the base metals that you need to build an infrastructure. They own that. That's a step certainly that people focus on gold and silver, but they're doing it in all commodities. And when we talk about the LBMA, largely the Chinese have involved themselves in what's called exchange for physical. And usually that ends up in buying COMEX contracts and delivering them in London. But what we've seen recently is a huge amount of kilo bars, I think it's called the mini contract on COMEX, that have been delivered to the Brinks facility in Hong Kong. And there is a COMEX Brinks facility that is largely only delivered into when it is exchanged for physical. And the author who talked about this very eloquently said what is happening is that they short the price of metal, they buy the physical for delivery off of COMEX into Hong Kong, COMEX Brinks facility, and then truck it to the Shanghai Gold Exchange, where it is then sold, to this mass exodus out of the Shanghai Gold Exchange, where they're delivering many times what the COMEX market does every day. And this is how countries are sidestepping sanctions. Like Iran will sell their oil to China for yuan, which is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And for all we know, it's the kilo bars that left the COMEX that were delivered to the COMEX approved depository in Hong Kong, then trucked to the Shanghai Gold Exchange, and then sold to Iran as they cash in their yuan that they use to, buy oil with or sell their oil with. And this is exactly this slow process of bleeding down the exchanges. And absolutely, when you look at the LBMA, they have the lowest level of silver that they've had maybe ever in the 140-year history of the mint that isn't already encumbered, belonging to ETFs and belonging to other entities. And when you realize that Gordon Brown sold the majority of all of their gold, there's no wonder that they're saying, we'll buy it back, even if we didn't produce it. That reeks of desperation. And, so again, I don't know how much time is left in all of this. I don't know when we're going to see the big move in gold and silver that we've all been anticipating, but certainly you can see it all around us in terms of geopolitical events, political events, moral, social. And then you see a mint like this saying, we'll take anything you want to sell, even if we didn't sell it to you. And we never did this before, but we'll do it now. It just tells me that the hour is drawing nearer before we see some sort of gold revaluation. And, you keep hearing that gold revaluation. Well, look, it's ironic that the central banks hold gold in their central bank accounts in an account called the gold revaluation account. You look at their balance sheet, that's what it says, the gold revaluation account. Roosevelt did it. He confiscated gold, which I don't see them doing this time because everyone owned gold back then, not now. It was currency back then. But then he devalued the dollar by 40%, making gold, go up 40%. And you got the head of the Dutch National Bank saying the same thing. This is what we should do. And a lot of people saying this is what we will do. We will just revalue the price of gold, and that will get our balance sheet in order, one that is continually denigrating by the day to the tune of, $100,000 a second that we are adding in debt to $1 trillion every 100 days. And yet we continue to borrow money and give it to other countries like the Ukraine, $60 billion, and chastise and call names to our congressmen and women who would have the audacity to question the sanity of maybe just putting America first once. And I think this is, you put it all together, you start to see just what it is that I'm talking about. And, I hate to be this pessimistic about things, but yet the lunacy continues. And, no more so than what we saw in the Jared Bernstein interview. I hope everyone checks it out if they haven't seen it by now. But there is lunacy all around us. And most of the people watching this show probably would have a better idea of how to run the government's finances on a big picture than the people that we are putting in charge. And this is starting to have consequences around the globe, not just in the United States.
Before we move on to the weekly special that I'm sure our viewers are keen on hearing about, you also have an update on Turkey's overtures towards joining the BRICS and what Turkey's position has been, whether ally or questionable towards the U.S., and what that signifies if they join the BRICS. Yeah,
they applied to the European Union. They are a NATO member, right? And which I find a little surprising. But they applied to the European Union, and they were said no. They have, to my understanding, formally applied to the BRICS. And there was a report that just came out by a man, what is his name here? Give me 1 second, and I'll pull it up here. Because I found it to be very, very interesting. His name, he's the head of the Turkish Patriotic Party. And his last name is Pirnacek. And he says he believes that with each year, the Turkish people are moving further away from Western values, and that the politicians that represent them. This is largely due to the position of the United States, which regularly demonstrates unfriendly and even aggressive behavior in the region and in regard to Turkey as well. He says ordinary people see it, our armed forces see it, and Turkey is America's main target. He says, as he shows a map of the country in which U.S. military bases are all around Turkey are marked with U.S. flags. What I'm simply saying is there has been a push, I think, for Turkey to join the BRICS, to question its relationship with NATO. And in fact, this man says we are in danger because of our NATO membership. And I think what you will see, people talk about the BRICS, but you look at these countries that are all being sanctioned, and it's almost as if there's a pushback of the countries, Turkey, Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, and an author I read called it the TRICS instead of the BRICS. And he says, an alliance of the economies sanctioned by the U.S. getting even closer economically and military. And the Eurasian alliance of the sanctioned is forcing the friends of the U.S. to play pragmatically. Well, Turkey is no different. So I guess all I'm simply saying is when you start to see countries that were once Western friendly sound the alarm, like Saudi Arabia. Now, I want to mention one other thing, and I know you didn't ask me about Saudi Arabia, but there's been talk of Saudi Arabia potentially signing a military agreement with the United States for protection. I don't think it will happen, and if it does happen, all they are trying to do is play both sides. In it, their demands are for civilian nuclear technology, how to build a nuclear reactor, if you will, for energy. They are also asking for very, very high-tech weapons that the United States doesn't normally sell to other countries. And, of course, they're telling the only way that this happens is if Israel will negotiate a two-state deal with Palestine. And, all I'm simply saying is that there is a lot of talking out of both sides of the mouth. And I think that when people say, well, Turkey is a NATO member, yeah, Turkey is very upset with the West and they're upset with the European Union. I don't think that they view the United States as the ally we once were, and they've applied to BRICS. And Saudi Arabia is no different. Saudi Arabia realizes that this is something you have to tread lightly on, but they're playing both sides and making demands that would only, I think, hurt the West more than it would benefit them to maintain this relationship, a temporary one at best. And the same thing is true about many of the other countries, like the United Arab Emirates, who says we don't want dollars for oil anymore, yet they are still not adversarial with the West, but moving more and more in that direction. So these are the little by little by little thing that we see. There'll be a lot of misinformation out there. There'll be a lot of double talk. Just understand that these countries understand the United States is not to be taken lightly, yet they're not to be trusted either. And I think this will be something that will surprise a lot of the dollar bulls and the people who suffer from recency bias and normalcy bias. These countries are shrewd and they're smart and they're getting all of their ducks in the row while not alienating themselves to the U.S. just yet. There will come a time when sides will be drawn and chosen, but I don't look for this Saudi Arabian pact to sign. And if it does, it will only benefit the Saudis to the detriment of the West. And the same thing is true here with Turkey. More and more of these countries understand that the West is not to be trusted any longer. And this is something that has to be done slowly, methodically, and correctly, not to jump too quickly. But I think we'll see more and more stories like this, including maybe even of South Korea, countries that are our allies that are beginning to grow tired of the way that the West handles their affairs and the way that they use coercion and suppression instead of cooperation to achieve their goals.
The principle that you're describing there is one you've illustrated before, is that you don't throw the switch over from one entire system that's running your financial edifice to another one without having made sure that you've got a solid bridge to stand on in the new one before you tear down the old one. And it also reminds me of the saying that, first people will say this whole process you've been describing, you were one of the first people to talk about it and to identify it and to name it and to point it out and to show the breadcrumbs all in the trail. And many people at first didn't take it seriously, or they thought, wow, you're really maniacally focused on that. But eventually, and this is the old saying, is first they'll say it's not true. Then when its truth can no longer be questioned, they say, well, it's not important. And when its importance is no longer in doubt, they'll say, well, after all, it's not new. So anyway, maybe someday you get to be told, well, it's not new. They've been talking about this for years. So
it sounds like the way they described inflation, wasn't existent, then it was transitory, then it was structural, then it was fixed, and then it was coming back, and now it's sticky. We'll see what their next explanation is. But yeah, I agree very much with that explanation.
Well, Andy, we could go on because there's more than is wholesome. There's more unwholesome than we have time to talk about in our political and financial world right now, and our viewers are aware of that. We try to hit the highlights and areas where people need to be aware of movements that are being made. On the other side of the coin, literally, for people who want to have something physical, tangible in their hand that is solid and will remain over time and preserve people's purchasing power over time, what do we have that's of special value at this time?
And I'm sorry if you hear what sounds like a jackhammer in the background. That's exactly what it is. They're jackhammering up some floors down the way. I hope you can hear that or don't hear that. In any case, right now we have, look, everything is on sale with the exception of Silver Eagles in my mind. They continue to march higher. Gold Eagles creeping a little higher too, but everything else is a good deal, period, until it's not. But right now we are specialing 1/10 ounce gold Maple Leafs at $29 over their melt value, and 2023 Silver Krugerrands at $3.10 over spot. Both great prices for great coins, but again, everything, with the exception of Silver Eagles, are on sale. And it's a trend that I, for 6 months, have been mystified by, as guys like Ted Butler continue to evidence this massive shortage of industrial size bars. And at some point that has to translate into the inability for these mints to keep up with supply. Maybe that's what's going on with the U.S. Mint, or with demand rather. Maybe that's what's going on with the U.S. Mint. I don't know. But for today, the Krugerrands at $3.10 over spot, and the 1/10 ounce gold Maple Leafs at $29 over their melt value would be what we have on special. But don't let that deter you from looking at other items as well. As far as I'm concerned, just about everything's on sale.
Well, Andy, we're always grateful for your presence here for this weekly market update, and our viewers look forward to it. You should see the comments in the live chat. Oh, Andy, the time traveler's here, because they believe that you must travel into the future to find out what the heck is going on. And so you can come back and tell us about it as you see what's ahead and as you look ahead. We're grateful for that.
Maybe we should do a live stream in the next week or two. I always enjoy them. I really do. And we could even do a marathon one someday when you want, and do it as long as you want. But I like getting people's comments, and I think that's part of the deal. We're a community, and a small but growing community who understand things, and to do things back and forth like that, to me is the best of all these interviews, because we get to answer questions in real time with spontaneity. So I'm always up for that. But as I always say, it's a true honor to be here, and if I have my way, I'd never miss a Tuesday with you, and look forward to next week as well.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for being here.
Stay well, my man.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for May 6th through May 13th, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature 2023 1-ounce Silver Krugerrand at $3.10 over spot. We also have 1 10th-ounce gold Canadian maples at $29 over melt. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.